The 1906 San Francisco Earthquake by Charinda Craglow, Sherry Kohler, Amanda Woodcox, and Catherine Wyatt. Displayed here are San Francisco residents during and after the earthquake and fire. The San Francisco residents were highly affected by the earthquake and fire. Approximately 3,000 residents were killed and 400,000 residents ended up homeless. The residents lost family members and friends, homes, their possessions, and they did not have the ability to communicate except with others on the streets, and transportation was severely affected by damaged streets, railroads, and bridges. Throughout this, San Franciscans discovered the place and the spirit to be home rather than the walls and the furnishings. The photos here show the amount of ground displacement that the earthquake caused. Roads, fences, and buildings shifted as much as 24 feet in some areas. The earthquake began from the northmost portion of the San Andreas Fault. This portion is approximately 2 miles west of the Pacific Ocean. It was estimated that the quake was between a 7.8 and an 8.3 on the Richter scale. This photo shows the area of San Francisco that was destroyed. These photos depict the severity of the fires and the people on the streets watching. It is important to note that following the major earthquake, there were many aftershocks which continued to cause more damage. Here we can see the shaded area, which is the portion of the city that was affected by the earthquake and the fires. The camps are in the top area of this diagram. At 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, San Francisco was turned into rubble. The residents of San Francisco that survived not only the earthquake but also the fires, the lack of shelter, food, transportation, and the basic necessities found a way to join together and support each other. The residents lived on the streets until they moved into the camps. They shared clothing, supplies, food, and water. Many families worked together and set up makeshift kitchens and fed as many people as they could. They helped their neighbors and strangers. The San Andreas Fault is a transform boundary plate. What this means is that it is two large plates of rock that rub against each other, and when they move, it causes an earthquake. One strength that was shown in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake was that the community came together to help one another. They took stoves out to the streets to create kitchens to feed everyone and made makeshift tents to allow those who had lost everything to stay warm. Everyone took turns cooking, and they all worked together to collect the needed resources. Another strength that was shown after the catastrophe was outside communities like Oakland and Tonopah, Nevada, came to assist and offer aid to the community. They brought in supplies and even offered to help cook and give supplies out of the back of the makeshift kitchens. The Red Cross and military were sent to help secure the areas and offer aid and food to those in need. Even with all of the chaos, the newspaper continued to run and update the public on safety locations they could go and a list of the missing. Between the temporary housing, food, and updates the public stayed calm and was grateful for what everyone was doing to help out in their time of need. Within hours of the quake, the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, California National Guard, and military cadets came to San Francisco to help. They unknowingly formed the largest peacetime military presence in the history of this country. Special police officers stated that anyone who was caught looting would be shot on the spot. This helped to keep peace and deter the public from stealing. Unfortunately, the fire department did not handle the fires well, which led to 5 square miles and 28,000 structures to burn. They were not prepared or trained to handle such an intense fire, let alone the structural damage caused by the earthquake. Their fire chief was killed during the earthquake, and a majority of the water lines were broken. The firefighters used gunpowder to break up the buildings, which caused large explosions that sent debris everywhere and caused more fires to start in areas that were previously cleared. They put the fire breaks too close to existing flames, which again caused the fire to spread faster. Finally, they did not check the buildings before using the explosives and blew up buildings that contained chemicals, alcohol, and other flammable material. Once the relief efforts started and the military came in, the citizens thought martial law had been declared and the military was in charge. However, that was not the case, and the military used force within the community to get what they wanted done. One large problem was food. Not only finding ways to feed all that found themselves in need after the earthquake, but also finding ways to not have food go bad before it could be used. The citizens of San Francisco created makeshift kitchens and cafes where everything was shared. Food was brought from everywhere. This included grocery stores where food would have gone expired, restaurants who had no way to cook or store the food, and residents emptied their refrigerators and cupboards where nothing could be kept fresh. This food was then cooked and shared amongst everyone. Places like the Mizpah Cafe began serving this food, and all who entered were served, no questions asked. Miller and Lux gave away all their meat to those able to cook it. To them, giving away the meat rather than letting it rot made sense. People helping people is what truly moved this community along. Shelter for those affected by the earthquake was another large problem. There were camps that were created away from the fires to allow individuals and families a location to sleep and make a temporary residence. Those that had shelter in other areas of the city allowed people to stay with them, usually without any questions asked. Due to the shock of having the earthquake hit, families were only able to grab the bare essentials before leaving their homes. This left many without clothing. Groups came with extra items for those affected by the earthquake, but also everyone in the community began sharing all that they had with each other. Finally, a large problem that everyone had to deal with was the fires. Eventually, people just walked by them as if they were just another part of the city as they continued to burn. Firefighters did what they could to control the flames. There were many short-term goals after the earthquake hit. First, people were focused on helping those that were injured, as well as locating their own family members or friends to make sure they were safe. Several people were trapped after buildings collapsed, so making sure no one was stuck and unable to get out was another short-term goal. Keeping the peace was at the top of law enforcement's mind. However, residents did not see this as a problem. Putting out the uncontrollable fires was another goal. Short-term, everyone affected by the earthquake needed to be housed and fed. And finally, the city had to be put back together. One long-term goal that came from the 1906 quake was an increased interest in the study of earthquakes. From this increased interest and study came a detailed report of shaking intensity and the rupture points from the earthquake. The reports presented were the first to show a description of the San Andreas Fault and the 220-kilometer offshore rupture and morphology of the fault zone. The data was obtained from the 1906 quake also led to the discovery of the elastic rebound hypothesis, which explains an earthquake cycle. When San Francisco started to rebuild, they improved their fire code provisions to prevent water main breaks and to allow other alternatives to accessing the water supply. The city also started designing the first seismic building provisions and began the Uniform Building Code in 1927. Insurance companies decided to tighten their coverage and tried to make it so they were not going to cover fires that started after an earthquake. However, the state of California decided that the insurance companies could not offer any fire insurance that excluded earthquakes and made it standard to cover for all California residents. As identified previously, the newspaper was a strength during this tragedy and was useful for getting information to the local community. We would use the newspaper to place a public service announcement on the community psychoeducational group. This PSA would identify the time and place of the meeting, as well as a brief description of what to expect. It seems that a medical center or community center that is in a safe area of town would be the most appropriate place to hold the meeting. Due to members living in different areas of town and a lack of transportation, we would need to have different meetings around with the same information and goals. It is important to address the elephant in the room and discuss why this group has formed, as well as a plan for the time together. Zastro identifies that when working with communities, it is important to keep the glass half full by focusing on the strengths and positive aspects of the community, instead of the hardships and deficits that the community is facing. In reality, there needs to be some discussion about a need, and then the group can focus on the resources and connection. So, to start out, we would ask the participants about their ongoing basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, and a safe environment. After these needs were identified and displayed, we would focus on the resources to address these needs. Several of these were identified in A Paradise Built in Hell, including butchers, grocery stores, and people who opened up their homes. We would facilitate connection to these resources by having each resource go to a different area of the room and encouraging the participants to speak one-on-one with the resources. After this connection time, we can then discuss other needs. Last, it is important to discuss how community members are coping with the tragedy of the earthquake and fires and managing different stressors. Through this, we could discuss positive coping skills and encourage more supportive networks in their communities. The previous slide discussed a semi-perfect scenario where community members were open and willing to participate. However, in some cases, this does not happen. Zastro encourages icebreakers and activities when working with groups to help participants open up. If it seems that nobody was wanting to speak, we could open up with an icebreaker that included a name game or activity that encourages teamwork. Participants may also be more willing to share about their needs if they know that there are other resources that can help them. We could also start the group by having resources and information in different areas of the room so that they could mingle before the meeting starts. Last, sometimes people do not enjoy speaking up in large groups. We could have a box to put questions or comments in that they could then be passed around and be presented anonymously. Here is a list of our resources used while creating this presentation.